remember a girlfriend at the time saying, there's blood in your underwear. Why? I go, oh, I must have scraped against a nail. Welcome to OZY Confidential. This edition, it's about power, a certain kind of megalomaniacal pull toward more. All right. So here you are. It's OZY Confidential. My name is Eugene S. Robinson, the host. So we're going to do something special to show you that this is an actual no holds barred deep dive into stories that are untold, unheard. I'm going to do something different. Usually I'm getting other people's stories, but for you, special for you, it's going to be my story. I'm in a band called Oxbow. A cursory, not even a cursory glance at your internet will tell you that if I'm known for anything, it's a certain kind of volatility. Which brings me to a friend, John Mitchell, used to be at the LA Times. We're talking about an article I wanted him to write, and the guy is goading me. Remembering when I was 14 and not nearly as adept at handling the reins of volatility as I am now. I remember you lifted weights when you were 14. You weren't making much progress. And I lifted weights as a hobby, but I competed right then. And my first competition in New York was National Gym Association, Teenage New York, Mr. Teenage New York, when I started to go through puberty. And, some guys say, oh, I was so horny all the time. That wasn't the issue for me. The issue for me was this really weird kind of sense, overpowering testosterone-fueled sense of invulnerability. I think they call it hysteria passio. I grew up in New York, so standing on the subway platform, and as a train started to come in, I started to have this increasing obsession, combined with standing on the edge of the platform, that I could throw myself in front of the train and physically stop the train. That I had through my weightlifting ministrations, I developed enough physical power to actually, now trains come through the stations, express trains, speeding. I knew I couldn't stop a speeding subway train, but as it cruises to a stop or starts up, I was convinced, and I actually had to force myself to stand back from the edge of the platform so that it was a very strange, weird, like Octave Mirbeau in the Torture Garden talking about these overpowering obsessions, compelling. It was like that. Based on what I know now about testosterone, I was probably peaking, and then I started lifting weights harder, and I probably just leveled it out. I didn't have that continued obsession with throwing myself in front of the train beyond my senior year. But of course, I left New York. And then I came out to California, and I went to Stanford, but I didn't compete at all during Stanford. I started lifting after Stanford seriously and started competing again after. I was doing insane things. I remember I was big into glandular extracts. I don't know where they got them. I don't know what was in those pills. You could get them at health food stores. I remember feeling dizzy a lot. The idea was that you had to make gains. It was a burgeoning supplement industry, and pumping iron had come out in the late 70s, and nobody had figured out, at least who was 17 or 18 like I was, had figured out that probably it wasn't just supplements that got them there. There hadn't been a lot of high-profile, well-publicized bust for performance-enhancing drugs. I was a purist for so long that it always feels kind of strange for me to talk about steroids, which is what we're talking about. I was surrounded by them when I was training in Brooklyn. I was surrounded by them at my gym in California. I trained down at Venice Golds. I'd figured out by the time I'd hit my 20s that Arnold and all the pro bodybuilders were taking stuff.
Fell in love with the weight training, or with the feeling of being strong and being big and all that, and I wanted to win Mr. Universe.
I wasn't interested, not at all, not at all interested. And then something strange happened. I competed in the Mr. California Natural, right? It was supposed to be a non-steroid aided show, which it was comically not. I finished last. But prior to that, some friends said, well, you're going to be in San Diego. You're going to be close to Tijuana. Go across the border and get us some stuff. So they gave me a bunch of money, and they gave me a laundry list because you could legally buy steroids there. And so the show was drug tested, but it was a polygraph. So as I'm sitting there in some kind of like Abu Ghraib type room in San Diego with the athletic commission, I have a fanny pack full of these steroids, which I had no intention of taking. And they're asking me if I'd ever taken them, and technically I had not taken them, right? So I answered and passed the polygraph. But something about coming in last place, I don't say it unseated me, but I started to think about the long view. And I go, you know, some of these guys, they're going to be gone tomorrow. You know, I'm a lifer. I've been lifting weights since I was 9 years old. I'll be lifting them when I'm 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. It's going to be a lifelong thing. So steroids, what seems to be like a quick gain for some people, could be mixed in like a healthier supplement. And on the drive back from San Diego, started to have these thoughts. And because I'm a hopeless, endless researcher, keep in mind this is well in advance of any internet. I worked at a defense company then and went into the LexisNexis network, which was part of the DARPA thing, and did all this research on steroids. And I developed, like you talk about Mitt Romney, I developed a folder.
Binders full of women.
A steroid research folder, which I still have to this day. And made what I thought was an informed decision that I was going to take steroids. I had been a purist for so long that I didn't want to be publicly identified as a guy who used. Initially, I wasn't ready for that yet. It's weird. Like why? Who would care? I was surrounded by, but that became my thing. Like I was the guy, like the guy who wouldn't. And in the punk rock community, straight edge was a thing. Non-drugs, straight, clear mind that I was going to do this thing, you know. Part of wanting to be kind of sotto voce about it was that I would do it myself. And keep in mind, it's not, the needles that you use for steroids are IM needles, intramuscular. They're 18, 20, 22 gauge. They're really giant needles. There's a catch, right? And the catch is, you have to inject it into a muscle. So it has to be a large muscle grouping. Now, I know guys who shot themselves in the quadricep, but these are guys who had already used and were big and had lots of muscle around the knee. Or the thigh, I somehow couldn't do that. But the most common was the buttocks. But it's hard to turn and do and see if you're alone. But I decided that was going to be the best place. And I remember a girlfriend at the time saying, there's blood in your underwear. Why? I go, oh, I must have scraped against a nail. But, you know, I mean, at that point, I still was in denial, sort of, about wanting to publicly be identified as a steroid user. And we're talking now 88. And I know this because I was in the worst movie of 87, Leonard Part 6, with a bunch of bodybuilders who were using and wouldn't talk to me about it because they knew, it's like, kid, don't do as I did, do as I say, fly the straight and narrow. And those guys all, to varying degrees, ended up having, not all of them, some of them ended up having serious problems connected to what some would say were personality deformations that came as a result of the steroids. You're walking along, you see a guy in the hole, you go, oh my God, how did you get in that hole? And the guy goes, well, I put my hand on that branch there. And you go, what branch? This branch? And you put your hand on that branch. He goes, yeah. And I put my other foot on that other branch. You, what, this foot? Yeah, and I jumped up and down really hard. Really? And then what happened? You know, and then you fall and you're in the hole next to the guy, you know, and that's, you have to realize that there's certain things. And I've recognized a cycle now with younger people who've come up to me and start talking to me about, yeah, boy, I don't think I would ever do steroids. And that's always a poker tell. You don't think you would ever, huh? Really? That means you think you would ever. So I went through the same, you know, as probably the life cycle of a steroid user. Denial. And knowing it's not good and then figuring, if the science were faster on this, this would just be another supplement. The rationale, and then, of course, taking it. And then once you take it, your vantage point is no longer reasonably trustworthy. Because one thing that nobody ever talks about when they talk about steroids, about how fucking great they make you feel. They don't want to talk about the fact that one of the things that was so compelling about it was that at least on the upward portion of your cycle, you feel like Superman. Mental acuity through the roof. I mean, if you're prone to being creative, super creative, 4 hours of sleep a night, no refractory period. You could, lots. I mean, and you just good-natured. And people said, well, what about the roid rage? I personally think it's like alcohol. It magnifies, they're bad drunks, but these are kind of bad people. It magnifies who it is that you are. It's all in the down portion of your cycle where you start to have weirdness, but on the up portion, it was absolutely fantastic. First week, you would have a regime of half a cc, maybe some orals, pills that would go with it. You would decide. My personal favorite was one called Sustanon, which was a mix of 4 testosterones, propionate, enanthate, and I can't remember the other 2. And the pills I decided were not only worthless, but bad for you because your liver attempts to metabolize them all at once, whereas the injectable, it passes the liver several times, so it's not as hard on your liver, which is one of the big problems. Week 2 would be like 1 cc, right? And no pills, or sometimes people would combine it with pills if you had good ones, like Anavar was a good strength pill, I remember. And I was taking this one called Decaderoblin, which was supposed to be one of the healthiest, safest, as these things go, steroids ever. But again, nobody tells you about the head game. They don't mention that ever, unless they're talking about it in the negative. I mean, the thing is, it's like if you've ever watched the movie The Invisible Man, the chemical makes him invisible, but it also makes him crazy.
Suddenly I realized the power I held, the power to rule, to make the world grovel at my feet.
You know who the Invisible Man is, Doctor. Where is Dr. Griffin?
So all of a sudden I hearkened back to that Subway thing, and I remember I'd written an article about a bodybuilder out in Sheepshead Bay who, in the midst of this kind of megalomaniacal steroid thing, had convinced himself that he could stop a car, like me with a train. Except he had a bunch of enablers, and all these guys were all taking steroids, in the common parlance, juicing. And they follow him. He goes, I can stop a car. And they go out to whatever that is, the highway that snakes through Sheepshead Bay, BQE or something like that. And they sat on the guardrail, and he waited, and he jumped out into the lane in front of a car. And technically, if you want to be philosophically consistent, he did stop the car. Broke both arms and broke a leg and was hospitalized, but that car did stop. Not the way he thought, and so I remember that there had been stories about guys who had gotten ill, but most of the people who got badly hurt on steroids were from other things. It was like from diuretics to lose water weight during a contest. And I figured these guys were just doing it wrong. I had one roid rage moment where I had these multiple cans of protein powders because you're taking tons of protein, and I had this old-fashioned can opener, so it left a really jagged line on the inside of a can, and the dog had a big mastiff at the time, had shouldered his way into the house, and I just started screaming at him, and I threw the can at him, and it cut through all 4 of my fingers, and which was a real problem. 1, I didn't like abusing my dog. 2, now that I had my fingers almost cut to the bone, it was gonna bite into my lifting time. Would you become pathological about your lifting time? Because if you're taking steroids and not lifting, it's like money out the window in that steroid addled state. And so I said, look, I need to control myself. I can't be one of those guys. I knew guys like that I couldn't be one of those guys. And so, but what was happening is, what was that thing that Tyson says about everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face? I literally got punched in the face by steroids. I didn't account on the fact, and there was nothing in the source material that says, once you take half a cc and 1 cc and 2 cc, your ability to cap it at 2.5 cc is going to be non-existent. Moreover, you're going to want to go, well, if 2.5 cc is tough. Maybe 3.5 cc. What about 4? What about 5? What about 6? I mean, this, I don't want to even say this is a worldwide phenomena, but it seems to me a particularly Western thing of just more, bigger, more. And so I remember trying to crazy glue together 2 IM the bodies of the syringes, the tubes, so that I could fit more, rather than take 2 separate shots, which I'd have to sacrifice the actual needle part. I was trying to crazy glue together 2 stems so I could have a super long needle and get 6 cc's. I didn't have enough insight at that time to realize that deviating from the plan was going to be problematical for me. Well, there used to be a TV show called The $6 Million Man, and he had like a bionic leg and a bionic arm, and he would do all these amazing things. Like he could run 60 miles an hour, but they never dealt with the issue of what happens to the non-bionic leg if the bionic leg is running 60 miles an hour, right? And this is where I was. My body was used to getting these chemicals that was making it do phenomenal things. I was deadlifting over 600 pounds. I had gone from a body weight of 190 to 265. I was bench pressing 315. That's 3 45-pound reps and a 45-pound bar in the middle. Close grip benching for 8 to 10 as a warm-up, squatting almost 500 pounds. I was a really big, strong guy. But of course, you've heard about it. They talk about a weird dysmorphia. I had no sense of how big I was really. I just knew I wanted to get to 300 pounds. That's what I wanted to do. And if it was 4 cc's or 5 cc's or 6 cc's at that point, that's what I was going to do. And then I have a weird relationship with my father. We only talked once since I turned 19. And he came out to talk to me. Maybe I was 30 at that point, 29 or something. And I said, look, I'm not breaking my schedule for you. I got stuff to do. He goes, well, what do you want to? So I'm going to the gym. Come with me to the gym. We can talk while we're at the gym. He was flying through or something. And we were going to work out together. And it was just this great moment where I hadn't completely soured on the prospect of having a father, but even though we had problems. And so we go to the bench press, and I put on 315 pounds. And he's like, I said, he goes, I can't do it. I said, yeah, I know you can't do it. It's for me. He goes, well, I can't spot you. I got, just stand here. I don't need you. So you measure your hands out from the ends of the plates. And usually when you do a bench press, you hold your arms like you're doing a push-up. So your arms are shoulder width apart. They're pretty wide, but I measure it out, and then I measure it again so that now my thumbs are touching in the middle, and I'm doing what you call a close grip bench press. Most people can't bench press 315 pounds anyway. Close grip, where your wrist bent at the middle and your hands are only thumbs width apart, it's incredibly hard. And I lowered it to my chest, and I'm watching him from the bench. He's looking down at me, and I'm watching him, and we're eye contact. And as I get down to my chest, I pause, and then I knock out 8 to 9 reps. And I'm just looking at him. And as I finish, I hold it at the top, and I go, you can just guide it back in. And so he pulls it back to 2 inches into the upright struts that hold it. And he goes, I stand up, and I'm still looking at him. I stand up, and he goes, I can't do this. And I go, I know, let's take off some weight for you. And it was a great kind of inversion moment. And then, of course, we went back to never speaking to each other again. So that was the last time I spoke to him. You know, if you grew up on ABC after school specials, you might think that was a good moment, but that was a steroid fuel moment of rage, you know. And what I was hoping was transmitted in that moment was, old man, you don't have a chance, you know. Or like the line from Cape Fear, you know, I can outthink you, I can outfight you, I can lift you.
I can outrage you, I can outthink you, and I can out-philosophize you.
I have exceeded you in every way. It wasn't a general good sign of mental health, but it was, in terms of my personal development, probably a really good sign. I was getting over wanting to be a son. Ah, God. This is the part where I'm supposed to be really candid to encourage others to be candid. But I remember the girlfriend I had at the time, there was a resistance to telling her because not only was your athletic performance through the roof, but sexual performance also through the roof. It's so cheesy. It's like, I asked one of my bodybuilder friends, I go, hey, do you let people know that you're on, or do you just let them think you're this way always? He was like, I'm this way always because I'm always on. And I go, well, I'm not always on, but I feel like I should totally disclose. And he's like, no, don't do that. So there were reasons why people were not really looking too hard. Like, gee, you've gained 10 pounds. I mean, everybody saw me taking protein. And there was a guy who I knew who was on a similar thing. And I asked him once, and the weird thing is, this is all completely illegal, but a large number of the people doing it that we worked out with were all cops. So it was a very interesting way of, this is prior to Barry Bonds and Mark McGwire and the steroid era of baseball, and these guys were taking growth hormone and all this other stuff, allegedly. But you had this weird detente with cops. So you'd know this guy was a cop, and he goes, "You're looking pretty good." I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Gained about 15 pounds in the last month and a half?" "Yeah, about that." He goes, what are you? I would say cybergenics. And so that became, yeah, me too, cybergenics too. And there was a thing called cybergenics, and that was pretty powerful, but it wasn't doing 25 pounds of raw weight gain. No, that's not cybergenics. But I never competed again after I took them because the purist in me didn't want to. I still, at a certain level, thought it was cheating and didn't want to do it. So, but also something else happened. When I started taking steroids, bodybuilding aspirationally seemed to be too small. This is the key to kind of the mental deformations. It seemed to be kind of a parochial greatness, and I was looking for masterful life greatness, like things, I was going to be the best singer and the best writer and the best, not just good, the best anybody had ever seen. I mean, it was a kind of madness, right? And a kind of madness, but I look back and I was super productive during that period. Published a lot of magazines, did a lot of interviews, did a lot of work, won awards, not just athletic ones, anything but athletic ones, And I don't know that I make a one-to-one connection, but if you're being productive, then some of that stuff is good. That might happen. And we were all, nobody ever talks about the euphoria. Look, you might feel a certain euphoria on angel dust, but you're not able to really physically back it up. But this was just, we were euphoric. But it was a cyclical euphoria, right? You for that up portion of your cycle. And the down portion was routinely terrible. So all the heaven that we had all been enjoying, these bodybuilders, bouncers, barbell boys that I knew, when we would cycle at the same time on the down, I remember going over pulling guns out of people's mouths because they were suicidal. Myself remember sitting watching some commercial for Scrooge. It was a Bill Murray movie, and at one point they're talking about putting a little love in your life. I'm sitting there sobbing like a baby, and it wasn't even the movie, it was a commercial for the movie, which is even worse, right? And I'm like, my God, love in your life. And then at that point I realized, I think I may have mismanaged the down portion of the cycle. But that was a very dangerous couple of weeks because I was having, they say in Apocalypse Now, I was having ideas that were increasingly unsound.
After that is ideas, methods became unsound.
And I was involved in a relationship then that was probably not the best of all relationships. And I was thinking, I I gotta settle down. I gotta get serious about life. Me and her, that all tied in. And then, of course, about 2 weeks, 12 to 14 days afterward, when your body starts producing testosterone again, your perspective comes back. But, during that 2 weeks, I could have said and done a lot of danger. I could have asked 3 or 4 people to marry me. Who knows? It was a cavalier attitude about things that I wasn't prepared and wasn't in the source material. The thing is, this community also included women. And women bodybuilders who take steroids, very frequently the changes that they encounter are irreversible. And there was this one friend of mine, and she had gone out with a friend of mine, and they broke up, and she was in the gym, and we were training together. And she had this very kind of effective way, this kind of breathy thing. I remember at the time, I mean, this is in my 20s, I think, oh, this is kind of sexy, this kind of breathy thing she's doing. But we were actually training together, so it was annoying after a certain point. I couldn't hear her, and I just said, I'm sorry, what did you say? What did you want me to put on? We were changing the weights on the thing. And she goes, put on a 5. And I realized that it was an accommodation that she had made because her voice had dropped an octave. So as long as she kind of whispered, she could maintain a higher voice. But when she raised the volume of her voice, it was, and that's like forever. I'm sure if I were to find her today, she sounds. So I was surrounded by examples of people who, mostly the women who had physical changes that they were never going to be able to come back from. And indeed, I got paranoid enough about some of those changes that I actually sought out a doctor. I went through several till I could find a doctor who, in my mind, was good enough, some might say crazy enough, to do the surgery that I'd wanted done, which was when you have men who have too much estrogen in their system get this thing called gynecomastia. Fat starts to form behind the nipple in the chest, and you start to develop kind of secondary female sexual characteristics. It's a common thing. It happens naturally, but it happens a lot when you see people who abuse steroids. So I said, I'm going to get around this, because once I'd started steroids, of course, the thing I told myself about that first cycle was, I just did it wrong. Next time, I'll do it right. So as a prophylactic measure, I want all that stuff, all those glands taken out. The doctor said, well, we can't do it if after it happens, because then technically it'll be cosmetic. So what if you were to have a biopsy done, we could say maybe it's possibly precancerous and we could pull it out that way. I go, cool, let's do it. So insurance pays for it. So I had to burst into the laboratory, and it was like to get my mammogram. But at least now when women talk about mammograms, I know what it's like. It's unpleasant. And they did the surgery, and they cut open my chest and use those claws that they have in amusement parks to get stuffed animal toys to reach and pull out all the glandular matter and cut it off. Took my nipples, put them back on, and sewed them back on, and put drainage tubes in my chest, which I wore for 3 weeks. So that was, if you smoke a joint, 3 weeks later, you're probably not remembering that joint you smoked. 3 weeks later, when I have tubes in my chest, I kind of remembered that this happened because I want to take steroids. So I was in at this point. I was committed to the lifestyle. You see, now sitting here like this, it makes me sound crazy. It made you feel good enough that it was an actual effort to stop. And I have to say, the circumstances under which I finally decided to stop were what, alcoholics call, you have these moments of clarity, and it was a pretty potent one. We were all racing to 300. And I say we, I'm talking about me and maybe 9 other guys, 12 maybe, 12 tops. And I got a call one day. A couple of things happened simultaneous. One of the guys who was one of the dealers would get this big shipment, and he would come to the gym and announce that he had it. And then he, like Johnny Appleseed, would go from house to house to deliver it. And one day he went to the post office, got the shipment, went from house to house, and the DEA followed him and busted every single person that he delivered to. Lastly, him. Somebody had gone over to his house to pick up his shipment, was sitting there as a guy in the blue blazers, kicked through his door. They come back to the gym and they say, so-and-so got busted, and everybody who had purchased from him or used from him interrupted their workouts. It was literally like a run on the bank, the opposite. Everybody grabbed the gym bags, and you could tell exactly who was using because they were all just out to go home. It's not like Coke where I'm going to flush it down the gutter. Nah, this stuff is hard to get, mostly to hide, give it to your girlfriend, put it at her house, or do whatever. So there was a massive bust, right? People were looking at real people, friends were looking at jail time, and that was a pretty potent call. You know, if ever there were signs, that was probably a pretty good sign. You know, that was a good time to stop. But people do start to know that you're the guy who knows guys. So I didn't buy again, but I made introductions again to people who would, guys I knew who were hardcore users, and they were not going to stop. I remember asking one guy, he was like an elder statesman, and I said, I'm going to ask him, when I was up to 6 cc's, how do I know? I haven't read of any cases of overdose. How do I know if I've taken too much? And I ask him, and he goes, well, I know I've taken too much and he pulls his shirt up. And yeah, he's got the ripped abs and stuff, and he pulls his shirt up and he goes, when I feel my liver, and he points to, and I for the first time notice something poking out of right under his rib cage, and he just, when I feel it, when I see it start to swell through my shirt, I back off. That was another sign. There's never any why. You never ask somebody, well, why would you smoke a joint? Why would you drink a glass of wine? Sometimes you just do these things just to do them, It's life on planet human. Why would you do that to yourself? You don't know how many times I've actually heard that, in regards to tattoos, or people do strange things sometimes, and there was nothing quite as strange as this. You made it through that one. All right, next up, next week, we've got a Swedish royal, former beauty queen, speaker of 3 languages, world-renowned Nietzsche scholar, PhD holder, and in a weird, unfortunate twist of fate, maybe, crack whore. Welcome to one Ms. Josephine Knockoff on the next edition of OZY Confidential. OZY Confidential is produced by who else? Me, Eugene S. Robinson, and executive produced by Robert Kulos. And this episode was sound designed, edited, and mixed by Jamie Kahn and Nick Johnson. For more OZY Confidential, check us out on OZY.com. That's OZY.com/confidential. We publish editorial companion articles on OZY and photos, videos for every single story. So to check them out, go to OZY.com/confidential. That's OZY.com/confidential. And you can see behind the scenes. You can learn more about the stories we tell, and even become an official OC, where you'll be kept in the know on all things OZY Confidential. And if you want to get in touch with us, learn more, or just generally vent, hit us up at confidential@OZY.com. We'll send over a t-shirt if we dig what you got to say, good, bad, or ugly, or maybe we'll get too lazy to do any of that. Thanks.